I checked down the hall, and we are, in fact, streaming this morning, so I'll just encourage everyone to speak into the microphone so all of our viewers can follow along. So I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order, and as the first order of business, I will entertain a motion to accept the July 26, 2018 minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay. Report from the Secretary. Joe.
Yes, good morning. Today we have additional correspondence from Mr. Giardine.
Okay.
And at our next meeting, we'll be reviewing the proposed seeker determinations for the Tranche 2 projects. And that completes my report.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Any questions for Joe? Okay. So next up, we have our report from the program manager. Chris, morning.
Morning. How's everyone?
Doing great.
Can't complain. Good. So don't have a tremendous amount this morning, but just wanted to update you on a few things. In terms of professional services procurement, I don't have anything in the works at the moment. Underneath procurement for bids and procurement, we don't have anything out to bid. Everything is that we bid so far is in. We're just trying to finalize a few things here with respect to contract approvals and utilization plans. So that's a work in progress. Under financing, just to speak there for 1 second, the Tranche 2 financing plan is still a work in progress. We're working through to determine the number of borrowings and when we borrow for the Tranche 2, kind of in concert with the procurement of when we go out to bid for schools. So we're still working through that to get that finalized. I do anticipate, though, that we will be back to the board here as well as to Common Council and to the school board in October, November time frame for the approvals to allow us to move forward to go to SIDA for the financing, similar to what we did before. So we'll anticipate that in October and November. So just a heads up on that one. No action required at the moment. Underneath the project design and approvals, we have been to SED 3 times for the approvals. The Corcoran and Danforth went in. We'll have an addendum for those because the state asks us questions, comments, concerns, and then we respond to those in addendum. So that addendum for those 2 is a work in progress. We're actually there today. Sean is out there today. Meeting with SED for Clarion Elms, doing the review for that with them. And we're going to continue to do those as we move over the next couple months here for the balance of the buildings to get the approvals in place. So that's what's happening on that end of it. Public communications, I didn't have any events this month to report on. Underneath the schedule updates, Tranche 1, as you know, we're in construction on Ed Smith, Fraser, Bellevue, Grant, and Huntington. A couple things that we have eyes on pretty closely at the moment. Fraser, completing the site work over there is something that's being focused on right now, and obviously a week away from school and getting going there, so we've got some site work we got to get dialed down. We feel we can get there with that. Grant is another one that we're focused on site work. If you've been by there, there's a lot more gravel than there is pavement at the moment, but we're going to get there with that one as well. And then on the inside of the building, we're focused on trying to get the toilet rooms, the new toilet rooms, expanded toilet rooms into service. We will not have all of those. We have a plan to work on to focus our efforts on the 2nd and the 3rd floor. And so that's what we're doing at the moment. So it's a lot of work happening there. They've been working pretty much every day of the week to get through that. So. Are they working regular hours? Are they working extended hours? Extended hours, Saturdays. Last weekend we had people there both Saturday and Sunday. To get past the mechanical rough-in stage of the project. So, yeah, we're working a lot to get there. So,
was that cost fixed in for the Saturday and Sunday work? Was that in the price?
It was not in their price, but it's kind of what they need to do to recover on the schedule. We haven't authorized any additional compensation for working that overtime at the moment. So, I think there was a bit of a schedule piece there that a little bit of that onus is on the contractor to make up for some of that lost time, and so that's what they're doing to work to that end. We have had a few, well, more than a few, some discovered conditions once we got into Grant and started to tear walls apart. We found things that we didn't know were there. We found some additional asbestos. We found a ceiling above a ceiling above a ceiling type of thing. So we have run into a few things that have contributed to that. So I don't want to make the statement that it was completely on the contractor. There were conditions that have contributed to some of that. So, not atypical for what we would expect in a building of that vintage when you start opening up walls.
So when you said you were going to concentrate on the second and third floors for the bathrooms,
Correct.
then I would assume the first floor is working.
The first floor will not be functional for the opening of school. We're working on a completion date to get those.
So when would the first floor be functional?
Right now, Nate is here with CNS, and so he's more succinct with where we are on schedules for the individual things. So let me ask Nate to just speak to that. First floor, our target right now, Nate?
End of
Why don't you come right up to the mic, please?
Yeah. Good morning. First floor target is sometime the end of September. We're still working with the contractor to develop that schedule and the actual completion date, but there are other toilet rooms on each of the floors. So there's basically 2 banks of toilet rooms on the corners. We're only working on one bank of toilet rooms. So there are other toilet rooms available. And those, particularly on the first floor, those toilet rooms are closest to the cafeteria in those spaces. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
And again, in terms of tranche 2, we're moving through that approval process with SED, and then we'll move towards a procurement process the fourth quarter of 18 going into the first quarter of 19. So under constraints and critical issues, just we spoke previously, I think once we have a full understanding of how we're going to move the project forward, we will go back with a revised comprehensive plan, which is required because of the moving to that legislative limit of 300 million. We have to go back to the OSC and just report that to them and gain that approval. So just keeping eyes on that to make sure that that goes in and comes back in such time that we have that before we actually get to the permanent financing, which is down the road a little ways, but something we just need to be mindful of. We spoke to, I have a couple things here with respect to the grant condition. We just spoke to that one in detail. The Fowler site redesign is something we're working on. The test results, the samples are now in the lab, and I'm working on getting a date when we get those back. And that's to confirm what the geotechnical engineer predicated this new design on. He wants to make sure that marries up to the samples and that they received to confirm what he's looking for. And as I said, once we have those samples back, then it's a regroup to say, okay, here's the design, here's what will work, and here's the cost that goes with it. So we're coming to that conclusion here shortly. Beyond that, I just did want to point on the middle of the right-hand side of the page, the cost increase that our budget will now reflect the full 300 million, and that $8.5 million increase from where we were at the 291 up to the 300 has not been allocated. It's in our budget. You'll see the line item in there for it. It's just as a lump sum at the moment until we determine where that's going to go. So that's what I have. Questions?
Chris, I don't have one for you. I have one, Suzanne, for you guys. And when we look at the debt service numbers, that additional $8 million, has that been provided to us? The additional $8 million in borrowing, how is that structured for repayment?
Good morning. The additional $8 million we have approval to borrow for from the city and from the JSCB and from the school district. We haven't actually put that into a plan yet and borrowed those dollars. So eventually, assuming that the OSC approves it, we would put that in for some of the buildings that are remaining in tranche 2.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Chris or anyone else?
I just have one quick one. Can you make this font a little bit bigger?
Yeah, it's formatted to print on an 11 by 17, so when it goes to that 8.5 by 11, that comes down quite a bit. So possibly we could get it printed on 11 by 17 would be easier to read.
We'll work on that.
Yeah.
Mayor, I do.
Yes, the answer is
We'll get the I-team on that ASAP.
Chris, just go back to Fowler again. Any movement on the estimates? We had
No,
one.
we have an idea where we are. We have a conceptual estimate that we put together to see where that is, and it doesn't appear that this new design is going to save us tremendous. It's not going to yield a huge savings from what we were before, because we took away a lot of the underground work and removal of the contaminated soil to try and stay up. But at the same time, this new concept requires us to do a pretty extensive amount of compaction of the site and then a preload of the site. So we kind of traded one cost for the other. So I would say that we really haven't gained much in terms of cost. We're still looking at that to confirm.
So when will you come back to this body with a recommendation which way to go?
We're meeting to have some additional conversations because there's a couple options still on the table that we want to entertain, and then once we have the option or the recommendation, come back to you. I would anticipate it, I don't know if it'll be next month, but probably the following.
And when you do that, you'll have a timeline?
Yes.
Just a timeline for it?
Yep. I mean, we have an idea of the timeline, but again, we want to, until we have the official design of this is what we're doing and this is the option, and then have to have that in our hand. And I would say that this may require us also, depending on where the dollars land on this, it may require us talking to the state again with respect to getting some additional dispensation if the cost is still going to be in excess of what our MCA will fund. So I would anticipate we may have another conversation with state ed on that.
If you could work towards next meeting, understanding you're balancing a lot of priorities, that would be appreciated.
Sure. We can certainly give a more detailed update on it.
Thank you.
So I'm looking for those test results to come back just to, confirm that what we want to do is what we can do.
Got it.
Fair enough?
Fair
Thank
enough.
you.
Are there copies for the public?
Of the report? Yeah. They're not back there. Typically they are.
Sorry, Rich, we'll get you,
We can get one.
get them to you.
I thought we had, just the agenda, okay, sorry, we can provide you copies.
We will.
Okay. Next up, we have our report on our financial statements.
Good morning.
Morning.
Okay, we had a couple of things happen here in June. We had a successful bond issue for Huntington and Blodgett and Fowler Roof. We borrowed $44 million, and we had the pay-apps, and we had some interest income come in, which was, that's building, which is a good thing. And then we also transferred $500,000 from the district to the JSCB project account for Blodgett. And I'll explain that further on as I get into the report. If you're going to follow along with me, I'm on page 5, and I'm going to start with the statement of net position. You'll notice here that we had a significant increase in our Phase 2 cash. Phase 1 cash did not change, of course, but the Phase 2 cash did increase by $44 million. Along with, we did have a band payoff. We paid off part of that, $6.8 million. And we also had $608,000 of payment applications that were approved and paid in June. And we also had $100,000 in interest income. So that is reflective on the assets. So that totals $280 million. Our total liabilities is $228 million because the bonds payable also went up. With the increase of the borrowing, that is also included in that particular line item along with the premium. So our total net position is $52,234,000 at the end of June. On page 6, the statement of sources and expenditures. Our year-to-date sources total about $121 million for Phase 2 and $9 million for Phase 1. This, of course, was increased by the bond proceeds that we received in June. Also, you'll notice that our capitalized interest has increased as well, and we borrowed the interest to pay back debt service excuse me, in both the first borrowing and the second borrowing of this year. So that is why you see the increase in capitalized interest. That is money that we're holding to pay debt service payments in November and May. We also, the numbers on Phase 1 have not changed. We had a pass-through for New York State funding for the debt service payments, and we also have the federal subsidy that comes in twice a year. That was also transferred out, as you can see at the bottom there. It was transferred to the district to help make those interest payments, but that was done in previous months. Also at the bottom, you'll notice that we transferred $500,000 from the district into the project fund, and that was for monies that we've been holding for Blodgett for a long period of time. There was some damage done to the roof a number of years ago, and at that time, I believe Blodgett was slated to be renovated, but somehow that didn't happen. So we were hanging on to that money until we did actually renovate Blodgett. So now we're moving forward with it. So the district held on to that money for all that time. So now we're transferring it, and it's kind of considered like local share. Okay, it's because it's coming from the district. It isn't anything that has to be paid back. We didn't have to borrow.
So Donna, before you go on, just I want to come back to the to that transfer, but the capitalized interest of $5.3 million, that's being held Phase 2 for debt service.
Correct.
What about the interest expense? Will a portion of that money be used? So there's $4.3 million in interest expense. Will a portion of that money be used for that, or are we just using the cash balance from well? So I'm looking at phase 1 and 2. That $4.3 million in Phase 1. How did we pay for? How are we paying for that? Where did the money come from?
State aid. We get 98% state aid, and the other 2% is local share. So that comes from the district.
So if I look at this 4.3, 98% of that's going to be covered by state aid?
Correct. Yep, that's how it works.
How do we, okay, and that's great. How do we differentiate that? Just so if I look at this report, I'd be concerned that part of the borrowing would be used to cover the interest expense. Only 2% of that will be used. Is there a footnote or something you can put on this statement that would indicate that?
Sure.
And now back to the $500,000 that was transferred out of the district. So did the district use some of its capitalized funds to take care of that for Blodgett in 2012? Was it an insurance reimbursement?
It was an insurance reimbursement.
So the district got insurance from the storm,
Correct.
had it in the account, and then used it to renovate it, and now you're transferring the money. Okay.
Correct. Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't state insurance recoveries when I mentioned the $500,000.
Because
Yes,
and that's great. It had to be one, because if the district took it out of its, its building fund, I would expect you would have said that it would be reimbursed from state aid or something.
Right.
Okay.
Not in this case.
Okay.
That's correct. Okay, and our total capital outlay to this point, that would be for year-to-date, is $8.5 million, along with $581,000 for Phase 1. Now that $8.5 million, that goes up to June. However, no contract payments have been made yet, not included in that amount. Even though you approved contractor payments at the end of June, they didn't get paid until July. So those contractor payments will be reflected in the July financial statement. This amount here does include what was approved in May and paid in June. So we're kind of on a month lag. The next page is the cash flow statement, and it basically just reiterates what I've just said, our total borrowing. If you add the two together, the $42 million and the $1.6 million, you get approximately $44 million that was in this particular borrowing. There's the $500,000 transfer from the district, and we received $101,000 in interest income, which now brings us up to $306,000. We also had, in the expense lines, we had the $608,000 we paid for payment applications, and our closing costs were $1.1 million for this closing. We also paid back $6.8 million to, in the ban, and which paid off our first ban that we borrowed back in 2014, I believe it was, because all the Tranche 1A schools we've now borrowed for, and we paid back that first ban. We paid back, if you notice in March, we paid back $7.4 million, and then in this borrowing, we paid back $6.8 million. So we've paid back $15 million. Actually, the report says 14.280. The other principal was paid by the district. So we end our year with $128 million in the bank, mostly comprised of bond proceeds. And then on page 8 is our inception to date report, and it basically gives you the same thing that you saw in the cash flow, but from inception to date, okay? Instead of year to date, this is from the very beginning. So that's why you have phase 1 on here as well as phase 2. And it shows what we have spent total to date, okay, in all of these categories. And that's pretty much it. Does anybody have any questions?
I have one final one. So we did a borrowing of $77 million, and the closing cost came to about 2.1%. And we borrow $44 million, it's 2.5%. Do they charge us more? Well, I'm just not sure as I understand. Why would they charge more on a lesser dollar amount?
If you notice there, and you take a look at that breakdown, you'll notice that some of them, some of the vendors' invoices, they invoice us for the same amount, no matter how much we borrow, okay? Others base it on how much we borrow. Your underwriter fee is based on how much we borrow. I believe attorneys is usually based on how much we borrow. I can't give you a definitive answer on that, why that's so different. I do know, though, if you look at, some of the other fees like Moody's and Fitch, they pretty much stay the same no matter how much we borrow, and we have to pay them.
No, and I'm not suggesting that. So when I look at a settlement sheet, right, some vendors are going to charge you a flat rate no matter how much time or what the dollar amount is.
Right.
The other ones, though, there's a formula. So New York State, there's a formula. If I looked at the so some of the ones with a dollar amounts vary, I would think there's a formula as to why I borrow more, it's less. I'm just not sure. And again, Mayor, I won't take the time here. We can talk offline.
Sure. It's a good question.
That's just money not going back to the schools. Paying $1.1 million closing costs. Just want to.
Agreed. It's something we can, I can question
we can
further.
Talk. We
Absolutely.
can talk offline, and we can bring it back to the full body.
Great.
Anything else? Good.
Thank you. Okay. Got a series of resolutions here, and Joe, I'll have you walk us through them.
Yes, we have several payment resolutions followed by some contractual matters. Beginning with resolution number 53, which would be the monthly payment to Landon and Ryan.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried.
Resolution number 54 would be the monthly payment to Turner for their PM services.
So moved.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried.
Resolution number 55 would be the payment to the contractors that are being financed through Tranche 1.
So moved.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried.
Resolution number 56 are the payments to the contractors who are being paid through the Tranche 2 borrowing.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried.
Resolution number 57 is a payment to Advance Media, and that's relative to the bidding cost, newspaper advertising, etc.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried.
Resolution number 58 would amend the contract with PAC Associates relative to the Bellevue Elementary School to add a contingency amount. And that amount would be dispersed at the discretion of the city engineer, depending on how the project progresses. We have contingency amounts built into each contract, and I believe we had to make this adjustment at this time once the funding became more available after we did the budgetary changes last meeting.
So, can you just clarify, Joe? So there was already contingency built in?
I believe a minimal amount, but not the amount that we were comfortable with.
Chris, do you want
Yeah, I
to
can
add to
speak
that?
Sure. Chuck, the answer is yes. We bid with an allowance inclusive of their contract, and then we had a contingency outside of that amount. When we made the award, that contingency was a little bit less than where we wanted it to be, so that when we did this reallocation and transfer that out, we wanted to restore that to the contingency to the full amount that we were looking for. So that's what you're doing here, is restoring that back.
But this is already budgeted somewhere.
Correct. Yes. It's no additional cost to tranche one. It was just that reallocation of where we had moved the dollars, and it was to restore that contingency back to the level that we'd like it to be at.
I have a question.
Sure.
Did we have a motion? I'm sorry.
No,
We did have a motion, and let's do a second, and then we can finish with the discussion.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Helen.
I'm looking at this one on 58, and I'm looking at everything that's included in here. So the furnishing, that came out of the contract, out of the original, but is it tucked away in these resolutions? No, so why does it say that?
I'm sorry, I missed your resolution 57, you were
We're on 58.
Oh, 58.
And it says, whereas pursuant to whatever, the improvement, remodeling, repairing, and furnishing.
It's the second one.
Yes, the whereas clause. So, that has been our standard language for the contractor resolutions since phase one, actually. And it's to cover all those possibilities, because we're not just reconstructing the building, but we want to, in some instances, we use the borrowed funds to also furnish the buildings. So we're covered if we choose to do that. I suspect your question pertains to, are we actually doing it for this particular project? Which this gives us the ability to do that. I guess Chris can answer if we're actually using that.
Not doing that currently, correct. It's right, the language enables you to do it, we're not doing that currently.
Not doing it for Bellevue.
Correct.
Okay.
But I have to look through the other ones and see if it's in there. Are we doing it for any of them? Because it's added in there.
In some of the tranche two buildings, we have some of the built-in casework and furniture, and we have some small budgets for those in some of the tranche two schools. But for the two on this one, in Bellevue and Smith, we've removed that, and that'll be a district procurement. How they do that hasn't been determined yet.
I think it would be helpful if I could, the council's question. So Chris, we have a budgeted amount, and we have a budget amount allocated to specific schools.
Correct.
If you can provide that at the next meeting, what schools we're talking about, that the budget amount is for the furnishings and basically for the furnishings.
Yep.
That'd be helpful.
Sure.
Right. And just to make sure we're hearing you correctly, Joe, this whereas clause is essentially a catch-all just to cover everything.
Standard length.
Yes, it was developed when we started the first phase one of the project with bond counsel, so that we were clear that how the borrowed funds could be used.
Okay. But to Helen and Calvin's point, it would be helpful to know in each specific case, so we'll look for that next meeting.
Sure.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Helen. Okay.
I apologize, I lost track who made the first motion.
It's Jaime and
second.
Calvin second.
Thank
So we are, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried.
And so Resolution 59 is similar. It's for J.D. Taylor at the Ed Smith School.
So move.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
Mayor, as it relates to that, and I know we passed a resolution, so we're getting communications from one of the constituents in that neighborhood talking about new in terms of renovating that particular building.
Bellevue, are we talking?
No, Ed Smith.
Ed Smith?
Is that something that can, I know we get communication pretty much every meeting, and maybe it's me, I haven't wrapped my mind, is it a possibility? To do new
construction
or renovate, and if we need to research it further and discuss it another point, we can.
We have had a conversation about that. This legislation does not include new buildings, so we're having conversation for the next legislation, phase 3, to have that possibility, but right now it's not.
So as it relates specifically to the Ed Smith project, that is a renovation project.
It's a renovation.
There will not be a rebuild on that specific project.
Thank you.
So if we're ready to move on, Resolution number 60 deals with the Landon and Ryan compliance contract. We issued an RFP 3 years ago. Under the terms of the RFP and their contract, it expires this month. We have been in discussions with them we have the ability to trigger a 2-year renewal on that. But due to some budgetary issues, mainly dealing with the fact that when we issued the RFP and then subsequently the schedule changed, the schedule for the project was extended. So the program manager is working with Landon to work out those budgetary issues for the 2-year contract. And in the meantime, we're recommending a 3-month extension just to give us the time to do that. Ideally, we would come back before the 3-month extension to wrap it up.
Any questions on that?
Yeah, so there isn't, and this question more for Chris or the district and the city, there isn't any concerns in terms of work product, output, input? It purely is budgetary, and I ask that. I know, certainly from my perspective, they've been invaluable, providing information, and besides providing information, someone that I've been able to rely upon, getting information, some of the diversity stuff. So I would just, I 100% advocate for them staying on board, unless you're telling me there's someone else who's doing a better job. So if it's budgetary, I'll let you folks do that. Do what you do. But I would want to state on record that I 100%, again, something unreasonable, 100% advocate for these folks being back on having a 2-year and having a 2-year or whatever the trigger is for their contract. And hopefully, if it's budgetary, it can be resolved in less than 3 months, because it creates a little angst for me.
Lamont, do you have anything to add to that, or? And if you do, if I could just have you step up to the mic. If you don't, that's fine.
Yeah, I just want to confirm they're doing a great job on the project, and they've been very helpful. And it is all just budget, trying to figure it all out. So I just want to make it clear on my end.
Thank you.
So we budget, we allocate a particular amount for all these contracts. And again, if this is an executive session conversation, we can certainly do that. Have they presented something that exceeded what the budget amount is?
I guess the concern is, like again what Joe said, the delays cause the spending to be more, so they just want to make sure that they can afford it, basically, from my understanding.
And an additional factor, when they first came on board, the PLA negotiations lasted much longer than anticipated. They attended all those negotiating sessions and were very helpful, because with this new PLA, the MWBE diversity plan was increased in scope, and that was an important part of making sure we had a PLA that met the board's satisfaction. So there was some additional expense with that first part of their contract that was not anticipated when we signed them up.
But that's happened with other contractors. As a matter of fact, we just approved an increase for millions. I wouldn't want us to try to balance the borrowings on the back of a small firm. We have, project overruns, we have contingencies in these contracts for a reason. If you're telling me they did additional work, and this is probably executive session. Correct me, and this is based on memory, and as I get older, it's not as good as it used to be. I don't think their budget was more than $2 million.
Yes, less than 2.
Less than $2 million, and we have contracts with others where it's multi-millions, and we're not the same level of conversation we're having here.
So I'd like to ask a question. So
it's an important conversation, so we should continue.
Yeah. So is this about in terms of are they asking more for the scope and service of work, or this is just a matter of sort of re-implementing the contract? I heard what you said in terms of because the cost overruns don't seem like it was directly, their fault, right?
Correct. It was not their fault. I didn't mean to imply that. We appreciated their extra help with the PLA. And in fact, the contract that is ending this month, they have a $500,000 balance on, so they have not exceeded their current contract amount, which is the good news. The hiccup is that $500,000, with the projections going forward of monitoring all the construction sites, would not cover the next 2 years. So we're trying to fit into the overall.
This is strictly budgetary. So you're trying to. Is this about trying to find
within the overall program budget to reallocate enough to add to that $500,000 to cover the next 2 years? But then when that 2 years is up, the current project, I believe, is not scheduled to end at 2021. So there'll actually be another contractual extension down the road that we have to plan for as well.
But this clearly is not about the work that they do. That work has been stellar, is what I'm hearing. You're satisfied with it. Turner's satisfied with it. I think we've all been satisfied with it.
Yeah, I think everybody just didn't plan for the delays. I think that's really the issue. We didn't plan for the delays to be in there, and the PLA going back and forth with the PLA.
But I think that because that was one of the questions I asked on one of the earlier resolutions, and it was said because of the delays. So why are the delays different for this company and it was rolled into the other company? I don't understand that.
Probably because we didn't prepare probably to we didn't prepare for them to go over probably. That's what I'm thinking based on talking to our financial people.
When you say we, who's the we?
Well, I'm talking about staff and our financial people that will look over this project.
And procedurally, there is a distinction from the other contracts, not to make too big of a deal about it, but this is a professional service, so just the way we approach it is a little different from the construction contracts, which once the bid out and the project is underway, we, contingency that Chris Gray mentions has to be there in case additional asbestos is found and other unexpected events where there's not really a lot of time to come back to the board and
I do understand what you said, but I heard what you said as well with the PLA, that they did the work and you were grateful for it because they were going back and forth with the PLA. So, it's the same kind of thing for me.
Helen, I would agree. So, Joe, you provided a distinction between professional service and construction services, and I appreciate the distinction. However, overrun is an overrun. If you did the work, I just don't like the optics of this. I'm going to put it right. I'm going to put it right out there. I don't like the optics. So, the staff is being fiscally prudent. We certainly need to do this body. We have a fiduciary obligation, which we certainly need to do. I would be concerned that we're looking to balance the budget on the backs of small contractors. And again, these folks are here every meeting doing presentations. Some of the overrun, we've asked them to do. If their fee structure is out of whack, similar to Chris mentioned before with Fowler, we thought, the cost was too much. I get that, but that's not what I'm hearing. So,
Well, and I would say our discussions with Landon have been very productive, going back and forth. So it's not in a criminous situation where we're just trying to work through them with the budget, knowing that in addition to the 2-year extension, we have to go beyond that to actually finish phase 2 in its entirety. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to deal with the kind of the big picture all at once and make sure it all works out in the end.
Right. But part of it was they had a misunderstanding on the projection, and so they had some costs that probably shouldn't have been in what they produced to us. So we had to go back with them and get them to iron it out. So that's part of what was going on.
I hope it can be ironed out by the next meeting.
Yeah.
And I just want to say that I appreciate that the staff is looking at this. We know that all the projects are coming over the budget, so we need to make sure that we look at ways that we can continue to put money into the building. So, it's a priority for me.
Okay, so the resolution that we have in front of us essentially gives us the next 3 months to figure it out. What I'm hearing from Calvin is I'd like to see it get figured out sooner than that.
Yes.
So we'll look forward to getting an update at the next meeting.
That will be our goal, to get it resolved for the next meeting.
Penny, did we
I'd
have
make
a
the
motion?
motion. I don't think we did, Mayor.
And do we
I
have
don't think we did.
We need a motion and a second.
I make the motion.
Second?
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion?
I will be asking about this at next month's meeting. I know it's for 3 months, but I will be asking again.
No, we just did the 3 months more as a
No, I
catch-all.
appreciate that.
Understood.
not to worry.
Okay. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay. Any other business to come before the board? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Mayor.
Thank you.